I will continue that fight here and beyond. But this is not my home.
When you get back to your home, who supports you?
The common people.
Let's be generous and assume that's going to happen. What was that like? Ruling without the rich? Not enough.
Lannister, Targaryen, Baratheon, Stark, Tyrell. They're all just spokes on a wheel. This one's on top, then that one's on top, and on it spins, crushing those on the ground.
It's a beautiful dream. Stopping the wheel. You're not the first person who's ever dreamt it.
I'm not going to stop the wheel. I'm going to break the wheel.
That is Daenerys in Game of Thrones, telling the imp she's going to break the wheel, as you've just heard. And we're here to break the wheel as well. We outcast imps on our own exodus in the desert of the real, as Jehovah plays his Game of Thrones. We're here to assist the dangerous divine feminine, or La Shekinah, the mother of dragons, the mother of the snake in the garden, and the mother of the reptilian demiurge. To return to this dimension, that's what we're helping her out with. Will she return? Will Sophia return? Well, that is the topic of this week's blasphemy. But first, who are you? And why exactly did you come here in the first place?
This is blasphemy! This is madness!
Aeon by Gnostic Radio, an initiation by conversation into the dark corners of myth, magic, and meaning. A crash course in cult, culture, and conspiracy. A virtuous virus invoking and informing history, holiness, and heresy. Each week, I, your host Miguel Cana, commandeers your connection to bring the most accepted and rejected scholars and provocateurs to your attention. Always through the God above God that can. Fun, compelling, and deeply weird. This is the blow your mind cocktail party conversation you always wanted to listen in on. But we're often too afraid to do so because Daddy Jehovah and Mommy Gaia said you should stay in your room of complacency, normality, and bigotry. You should be seen but not heard as you vanish in the hopeless herd that is humanity.
Slaves with white collars. Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes. Working jobs we hate so we can buy shit we don't need.
But no more, for you now know who your true mother is. And angels and dragons fear her footsteps down the rectums of reality as you yourself enter the inner sanctums of Gnosis. Here on Aeon by Gnostic Radio.
Yes, these are bruises from fighting. Yes, I'm comfortable with that. I am enlightened.
The Gnostics were the ancient and perennial geeks and anarchists. They drew hard lines in the sands of a tortured history. They appropriated and deconstructed, but never compromised, rejecting the God of this world and all his empty marketing works. They never accepted reality as it was and strove for so much more. Why didn't and why haven't they turned into school shooters or Heaven's Gate revivals or suicidal emos and other groups that have also rejected reality? Because they never forgot their sacred and profane purpose, never forgot meaning is more important than facts. Because they never divorced reason and knew there were logical dots to connect in order to redeem the multiverse. Because they saw the knowledge of the heart that made them care for the least of their brothers. Understood compassion was as essential as the air they breathed. Lastly, because they took the fight directly to the Archons with their innate creativity and inventiveness, instead of taking guns, meds, or just delving in bad social media. That is true revolution, my beloved true seekers.
What is the Matrix? Control. The Matrix is a computer-generated dream world, built to keep us under control in order to change a human being into this.
No, I don't believe it. It's not possible.
I didn't say it would be easy, Neo.
Chris Knowles, who knows and embraces Gnostic philosophy, puts it all well with this quote. There are those who will never accept your way of thinking. They will interpret any attempt to compromise or reason as a sign of weakness and as permission to attack, in much the same way a shark interprets blood in the water. Never give an inch, never blink in the face of opposition. Turn their intransigence against them. Use their refusal to depart from reduction as permission to explore the most extreme possibilities. Develop the instinct of a wild beast who is tender with his kin and totally and absolutely merciless with his enemies. Marry that instinct to the intellect of a philosopher.
The poor and the underclass are growing. Racial justice and human rights are non-existent. They have created a repressive society, and we are their unwitting accomplices.
So, you still might be asking, is Sophia returning? We've dealt with this cosmic scenario before, such as with our interview with academic Mina Cho, who found that such mystics as W.B. Yeats had been prophesizing the return of Wild Rose, or Hagia Sophia, very literally. On this October, the year of our demiurge 2015, our astral guest puts it all into wholly revolutionary perspective. We have the infernal honor of being joined by Trisha McCannon, author of several best-selling books, including Dialogue with Angels, Jesus, The Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years, and others. Tricia is a researcher, mystic, and mystery religion priestess. In this Eternal Now, she will be explaining her latest work, Return of the Divine Sophia. The book is a comprehensive and definite work that spans so much on the divine feminine throughout history and her necessary role in the present. It certainly has binders full of Mary Magdalene and her many avatars, from ancient times as Isis to Cathar legends, from prehistoric times as a fertility deity to modern revivals.
I am the beginning, the end, the one who is many.
For more information on Tricia, please visit TrishaMcCannon.com. That is Tricia, McCannon.com. Beyond Tricia's works, I'd like to recommend a provocative new book by an emerging voice in metaphysics. That is my friend Scott Smith, who has been on our show several times. His book, God Reconsidered, Searching for Truth in the Battle Between Atheism and Religion, goes where other authors fear to tread, explaining exactly why other philosophies, from militant atheism and Buddhism to Hinduism and Orthodox Christianity, are fatally flawed, and why Gnosticism best explains life on earth and the supernatural order. God Reconsidered is available in both Kindle and Nook versions and can be ordered from Scott's website, where you can read a free chapter, and the website is godreconsidered.com. I can guarantee you will not be bored by it, to say the least. Scott is also looking for a debate partner for this very show. Someone in the atheist, Buddhist, Hinduist, or New Age camps that would like to argue his research. Let me know. And again, that is God Reconsidered Dad Can.
Maybe it's true. Maybe God threw the dice once too often. Maybe he let us all down.
I won't go into my support hack right now, as by now you know what you need to do to keep this red pill cafeteria open, and to make sure you truly become part of the eternal soundtrack of the counterculture. You know, books, support, Amazon affiliate, or just let me know. Either way, even if you just want to chat, shoot me an email at miguel@thegodabovegoddadcan.
Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, is that it?
Instead of the support monologue, I'd like to mention that our daughter, Ellie, is still in the hospital at almost 2 months. Our newborn has an amazing spirit, and she's fighting the good fight. But she just can't get around that archontic corner. Like Sophia returning home, we hope, no, we know that she will return home in the future. It's been a very testing time, my beloved True Seekers. One of the hardest periods of my life. But our family hangs in there just as faith, hope, and the knowledge of the heart need to always hang in there.
If we have souls, they are made of the love we share. Undimmed by time, unbound by death.
As Kabir said, it's a hard fight, this fight of the true seeker warrior. And don't forget the words of Chris Knowles at the beginning of the show. Much appreciation to those of you with your kind words, prayers, meditations, or just sending wind to let Ellie spread her amazing wings. When I'm in a room at Lurie's Children's Hospital at downtown Chicago, with the machine that goes bing, I always play her Matchbox 20's very Gnostic song, The Real World. These sections say mostly how I feel about Ellie in the situation. Please don't change. Please don't break. Could the only thing that seems to work at all is you? Please don't change at all from me to you, and you to me.
We all have our journeys to make. I will see you on the other side.
Gandhi was once asked what he thought about Western civilization. His answer was, I think it would be a great idea. Yes, and it will be also a great idea when wisdom returns finally. Cast out of this cosmos, or forced to wander with us imps in the exodus of the meek and artistic. For 40 billion years, here in the desert of the real.
I mean, look at this. Look at it! A world built on fantasy. Synthetic emotions in the form of pills. Psychological warfare in the form of advertising. Mind-altering chemicals in the form of food. Brainwashing seminars in the form of media. Controlled, isolated bubbles in the form of social networks. Real? You want to talk about reality? We haven't lived in anything remotely close to it since the turn of the century. We turned it off, took out the batteries, snacked on a bag of GMOs while we tossed the remnants in the ever-expanding dumpster of the human condition. We live in branded houses, trademarked by corporations, built on bipolar numbers, jumping up and down on digital displays, hypnotizing us into the biggest slumber mankind has ever seen. You have to dig pretty deep, kiddo, before you can find anything real. We live in a kingdom of bullshit.
This is the Aeon Byte interview, And with us, we definitely have the pleasure of being joined by Trisha McCannon to discuss her book, Return of the Divine Sophia, Healing the Earth Through the Lost Wisdom Teachings of Jesus, Isis, and Mary Magdalene, as well as some of her other works that we will touch upon. How are you doing today, Trisha?
Oh, I'm wonderful, Miguel. What a pleasure to get a chance to speak with you and all the wonderful people in Chicago and the extended area. We're down here in Atlanta, and it's beautiful, sunny weather today. How's it up there?
It's starting to get to looking a lot like fall. Brown leaves and cool weather, so it's sweater. So, yeah, don't mind sending a little bit of heat up here when you get a chance.
Yeah, I think we've been in the 50s in the mornings here, but I see from the weather report you guys are going to start getting snow up there in the Northeast. So, you know, if anybody can handle it, it's Chicago, the Windy City.
Oh, yeah. It's part of the norm in our lives. But could you maybe tell us something that has definitely been not normal, and that has been your spiritual hitchhiking? Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you came to write this book.
Well, thanks so much for asking. Yeah, Return of the Divine Sophia has been a very powerful experience for me in the process of having it really unfold. And as you may know, I'm the author of 3 books. The first one is Dialogues with the Angels, and that book was really a first-person story talking about how I've been clairvoyant since I was a child. I grew up across from a great forest, and I could see elementals and devic spirits in the woods. And when I was 8 years old, an angel came and began to teach me about the great vast hierarchy of worlds and how the light and sound are stepped down and how eventually we come into the physical earth school. You know, I was 8. That made perfect sense to me. And growing up in my classically American dysfunctional family, you know, I think everybody had different ways of coping. My dad was a very brilliant man, a lawyer, but he had a massive stroke. He had been in World War II and the Korean War, and he was a pilot, and I think the stroke had come from being up in the plains, and it really took his whole life down. So he survived it, but his whole left side was paralyzed and he drank. And so, as you can see, the family kind of went down a path of a lot of suffering, as many families do. And I have 2 sisters, and we all had different ways of coping, and my way was spending time in the forest and talking to God. And I began to really have my clairvoyant and clairaudient centers open and to begin to see and experience multidimensionally. And so I've sort of had that gift since I was a child. And when I was young, I sometimes I'd look at people and be flooded with information, and other times I'd try to see stuff and I couldn't. So that very first book, Dialogues with the Angels, is very much about my journey to awaken these gifts, how I wound up meeting a group of masters called the Viragi Masters when I was 19 years old and at school at Florida State University. And these masters, most of them are interdimensional. There's probably 5 that have human physical bodies. And they taught about this vast hierarchy of dimensions and worlds that this angel had spoken of. And they also teach that we are immortal souls and that we can travel in these other dimensions while we're still living in our physical human body if we develop something that they call soul travel. And of course that made perfect sense to me because after all, you know, I sort of kind of like the evidence. I don't want to just believe something and then, you know, die and find out I was wrong. I'd really like to see if I can find the answers now while I'm still, you know, alive. And so I became an initiate of that path, which of course embraces Jesus and all the great spiritual avatars and masters and all the beings of light that have come down here to try to help humanity, both male and female. And then as my journey progressed, you know, I was to encounter higher level divinities and masters that became my teachers. And so that's kind of what this first book was about. And then the book on Jesus, of course, predates this book on Sophia. And that book, I was actually writing a book about being taken into these great mystery schools. The priestesses of Isis that were active for many thousands of years in Egypt and being trained in the Native American twisted hair tradition, who claims to know the secret history of the world going back some 230,000 years in Earth's history, the Celtic mysteries, the goddess mysteries, all of these traditions that during my 20s and 30s and 40s, I became an initiate of. And I was writing a book about that, and of course I had included 3 little chapters on Jesus because I happen to think Jesus is incredible and amazing and, you know, right to the heart of things with his message of forgiveness and compassion and love. My book had become too long, and I really didn't know what to do about it, but I realized that I had 200 pages on Jesus' hidden history inside of this bigger book, and I decided I know what I'll do. I'll just take it out, and that's going to solve my space problems. But clearly, you know, the masters had another idea, and so no sooner than I had decided to do that, it was right after Christmas in that very quiet time when, you know, everyone's tryptophaned out from eating too much turkey and, you know, they're broke because they spent too much on Christmas.
Right.
I was laying on the floor in my office with my hand over my eyes, and I became aware of this bright light shining down on me. And I moved my arm, and Jesus was standing in the room. And he was totally in light, in a golden light. He appeared to be about 6'1", if I had to try to describe him in physical terms. Definitely had the shoulder-length hair, you know, and the beard, much more sort of, I would say the coloring was like brownish blonde, with a little hint of red kind of coloring, with its gray blue eyes. And he said, without any preamble, I want you to write a book about my lost years and secret teachings. There has been enough war and bloodshed in my name. And, you know, it was like an arrow just pierced my heart when I could just even catch my breath from the magnitude and the power of his energy field and how it opens up the heart. I think I thought something, you know, silly like, well, could I finish this other book first? Because, you know, hey, I'm running out of money. You know, we're so human and we're so mundane. And he smiled and he waved his hand and he said, well, just take a moment and don't worry, I'll open every door. And of course that moment really became 3 years where I really went into the cave and entered the secret hidden mysteries about what his lost years were and what his secret teachings were. And, you know, I travel and teach and speak all over the world as an international speaker. For many, many years, it's been about 10 cities in the U.S. and about 3 countries. Well, for about 3 years, I just could not get out of the cave. I was like, you know, the finger of God was on me saying, you will, you know, complete this task once I agreed that I would do it. And I got a lot of spiritual help, Miguel. I will tell you. I had people ring my doorbell and appear with hidden texts, and they had been told to bring them to me. I had books here on my library shelf that I know good and well that I had never seen and had never bought. I had a guy his dad was a missionary and he became a missionary, but he was a very expanded Christian, and he collected secret hidden books himself his entire life, and he showed up at my door. And so it was really quite a journey. And because, as you know, I'm a clairvoyant and I've read for over 6,000 people around the world, and I organize all my information visually. And so I put together a whole group of gorgeous PowerPoint presentations on the Egyptian mysteries, on the Jewish mysteries, and then on the Christian mysteries. And then about 6 months later, I began to write the book on Jesus. And no sooner than I did was I discovered in the research the presence really of the Great White Brotherhood or Sisterhood or whatever we want to call it, the Fellowship of Light. It's gone by many names, and there are many chapters across the world. And as you know, the mystery schools were up for some 4,000 years before Jesus was born, and some 400 years after the crucifixion. And most people don't know anything about the mystery schools today because, you know, over the centuries, there's been a huge cover-up within, you know, the Judeo-Christian societies that just sort of killed anybody that had this knowledge and burnt vast libraries. And so for someone who really, really looks like I have looked my whole life, and these other people who had shown up at my door had looked their whole life, there are, let us say, breadcrumbs of a trail that you can follow to begin to piece together a pattern that tells a greater story. And the story, of course, that I told in the book about Jesus, I think the subtitle is this really incredibly long title, like Jesus, the Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years in Ancient Mystery Religions. My publisher named that one. I would have just called it The Lost Years in Secret Teachings, but it's a great book because it's a tour de force of the mysteries. So, Jesus studied with the Essenes, which, as you know, is the esoteric arm of what was left of the wisdom of Moses and a Judaic path. And he studied with the Druids in England. And the Druids were all throughout France and Britain and Scotland and Ireland and Poland and Germany. And they had actually a very sensible way of teaching. He was with them for only 2 years, but they realized he was so advanced that they sent him on to India. And he was in India for several years where he studied with the Brahmins and became initiated in those traditions. And his healing really, really opened up at a very deep level in India. But then once he graduated from the initiations, he, of course, began to teach his own wisdom. And in that time, in India, there was a huge caste system. So, the Brahmins sort of held the sacred books, and then you had the noble class, and you had the military and the merchants, and it moved down to the farmers and the peasants, and then eventually the untouchables. Well, the last three classes were never even able to hear any sacred scripture. And some of the other classes could hear it once a year or 3 times a year. And Jesus taught, as a great humanitarian that he was, he taught to every race, every age, every class, every culture, every gender. And this almost got him killed because he was very, democratic. And he was interested in freeing all the hearts and minds and souls of everyone. And there are 2 stories, one that the Magi saved him or warned him, and the other that the farmers or the peasants did. But he fled to Rajagira, and he was at a Buddhist temple in Rajagira up in the mountains for about 6 years. And he learned to read Pali, P-A-L-I. And the Buddhists came to acknowledge him as the second Buddha that the first Buddha had predicted would incarnate 500 years after him. And that's, of course, the same time period that Jesus was there. And then, of course, I'm sure he could have stayed, but, his mission called him. So he came back across the Silk Road and the Toweret Pass and was initiated by the Magi in the Zoroastrian and the Persian mysteries, the Saramong Society. And those were great star mysteries that really taught about the cosmos, taught about the return of a being that they call the Sarashant that periodically comes to Earth to basically redeem the world. And that being is also called the Cosmocrator because he represents sort of the, let us say, the compass or the North Star. He's aligned with the Tree of Life. He's aligned with the cosmic pole. And the universe turns around him because he is so aligned with the power of truth at the highest level. And then, of course, eventually he came back. He was in Jerusalem for a couple of years in his late 20s, went up to the Druids for about 6 months, and sort of probably for a little R&R before beginning 7 years of training in the Egyptian temples. So, his ministry was 3 years, but he didn't start his ministry at 30 and end at 33. Probably the earliest he would have started would have been around 37, and it could have even been like 43. And this is actually something that I discovered in my research, that a lot of the early church fathers were quite upset that they had changed it to say he was 30 to 33, because they knew that wasn't true. But
yeah, the church father Irenaeus said Jesus was older.
Oh, yes. I always say his name is Irenaeus.
Oh, don't worry. I pronounce things
it's hard
very
to know
differently.
how to pronounce.
We weren't there.
Well, it's hard to know. Yes, it's hard to know how to pronounce them now. So but he did. He said that, and the reason that we think he was 30 is because Luke, who did not really know Jesus, Luke, if you guys remember, or the listeners, was actually a disciple of Paul, and Paul, of course, was originally Saul of Tarsus. So who persecuted Jesus and then was blinded by the light on the road to Damascus and became Paul afterwards. And then Luke became one of the followers from Paul. So Luke never knew Jesus either, which is so weird that, we think of Luke as one of the 12 original apostles when he wasn't, because he didn't know him. And so Luke and Paul were largely working with either divine revelation or hearsay. And Luke says in the Gospel of Luke, he appeared to be a man around 30. Well, certainly if you meditated and you were a, God-realized being like he was, you might look like you're 30 at 40 years old. But in the Gospel of John, which is my favorite Gospel, there's a whole scene where Jesus is speaking to these Jewish people and he's saying, before Abraham was, I am. And the people look at him and say, man, are you crazy? You're not yet 50.
Yeah.
Now, that's something you might say to a 40-year-old or 45-year-old, but you wouldn't say that to a 30-year-old, because it's too big a gap, 20 years. So anyway, the journey of writing that book, I wound up having to pull 200 pages out of the book because the Jesus book has 100 pages of bibliography, footnotes, and back matter, and 1,200 footnotes, and over 100 illustrations. And so, and you can find it online. You can get it from my website. That I'll give you that later, or you can give it to the audience. So I pulled 200 pages out that I found out about his secret teachings that, of course, were taken out by the correctorites. And the correctorites were people that the church hired at these different councils or after the councils when they made policy decisions. Maybe we should take reincarnation out. Okay, we've got to hire those editors again to go in and line by line, paragraph by paragraph, chapter by chapter, be sure that we take out as many references as we can to, let us say, for example, reincarnation, or Mary Magdalene being a more significant wise woman. And so consequently, what we sort of had in the Greek version that then got translated, into the English version is, as I talk about in this new book, Return of the Divine Sophia, we have a very watered-down version that has been seriously edited with key essential teachings that have been taken out. And, this book, Return of the Divine Sophia, when I began to write it, my big question was, would it be possible for me to introduce people to those amazing, beautiful teachings that have been so important that got subtracted from Jesus's, words because of political and social and financial reasons, in an age of the patriarchy that didn't really want there to be equal partnership. They, were really voting for women to have little or no power. And Jesus was very much an advocate for both men and women because he understood that the soul has no gender, that soul is beyond male and female. And he understood that we do reincarnate, and sometimes we come in as a male, sometimes as a female. Both have their gifts, both have their advantages and disadvantages, both have their strengths. And so he certainly did not discriminate. But one of the things I bring forth in this book about the Return of the Divine Sophia is that in my research I found that apparently there was a much longer age, a time on Earth that lasted probably from the time of Homo sapiens sapien. Homo sapien probably came up about 200,000 years ago. Homo sapiens sapien, which is our version, probably 40, something like 40, 50, 60,000 years ago. So what I found archaeologically and anthropologically is that there's no indication of war prior to about 4000 BC. And the reason for that is because the kind of societies we were living in were partnership societies where men and women ruled as equals together. And usually the woman was the high priestess and she was the queen. And the line of succession usually passed through her because everyone could see, she gave birth and her daughter would be the next, high priestess. And hopefully the most wonderful hero, the noblest man will be chosen as the husband for the daughter. And so the queen ruled with her brother, or she ruled with her husband, or her mate. And he had his power, his areas of responsibility. She had hers. And everybody was happy. Everybody was in balance. And these were harmonious societies. And when I discovered that there was no archaeological evidence for war prior to 4000 BC, I was like, what the heck? I mean, what happened?
Yeah, no kidding. What happened,
No
Tricia?
kidding. What happened? I mean, you look around, and all we have known is war, and more war. I mean, I think most of us have just come to believe that we're like this incredibly difficult, persnickety, territorial, warlike race that, has to beat people up in school, bully them on the internet, start wars, overseas, invade other countries. I mean, we look like a pretty despicable lot.
We would to aliens.
We would, yes.
Or we do to aliens.
It's like at any given time there's something like 30 or 40 wars going on this planet at once. Like we're these children in the schoolyard that just keep fighting, and we don't seem to be able to, get along and get the memo that, hey, we have another way of living. We could choose to live in harmony and peace. We could choose to not rape and pillage the earth. So what happened when I began Return of the Divine Sophia? I returned to the book that I was writing about the great initiation schools and about my own personal journey.
Wait, Tricia, can I interrupt there? We still don't know the question. What exactly happened around 4000 BC? I mean, I've had guests on that have talked about and maybe a natural cataclysm. There was the Aryans who had a power grab and the men took over. In your research, what happened in 4000 BC, or what changed?
Well, what I found in my research was more linked, and again, I'm citing anthropological sources. The anthropological sources say that around 1800, 2000 BC is really when these very aggressive patriarchal warrior dudes kind of swept down, and there are different versions. Some think they were the Kurgans of the Russian steppes. Some think they were the Semitic race, like the Syrians and the Iranians and all those guys that don't seem to be able to quit fighting over there now. Some think that they were the Phoenicians, which were, many believe the Phoenicians were the remnants of the warrior race in the last days of Atlantis, that were sort of really, they had lost their home and they, were part of the military army. So there are different theories about, some think they were the Aryans, that swept down with horses and so forth. But what the anthropology shows is that they came into the Mediterranean, they basically murdered the men, the peaceful men, they raped the women, and the ones they didn't kill, they subjugated and they made wives or concubines, and they basically took over. And they erected, their gods were all very warlike gods, and the women sort of moved from wisdom goddesses that had power and thought truth and so forth and helped to birth the universe to Venuses, eye candy. She looks good on my arm. She's good for sex. She's good for raising my children. And then, after that, we'll discard her. So it was a whole shift in the consciousness. What I think happened, to answer that at a deeper level, I think a lot of things might have happened. One, the Age of Aries came in around 2150 BC. And if you look at the history, it's the Babylonians fighting the Assyrians, fighting the Persians, fighting the Jews, fighting the Egyptians. I mean, everybody was fighting there for 2,000 years. You have the rise, literally, of the Roman Empire during that 2,000-year period from about 2150 BC to the time of Jesus. You have Alexander the Great, who was really the first big defeat of the Persians. And I think that, again, you have the whole Yahweh story. And the Yahweh story that's told in the Old Testament, as I talk about in my book, who knows how truthful that really is? Because, it's possible that the priest of Yahweh basically made up a lot of that for their own purposes. We definitely have strong evidence that for a long time in the Jewish teachings, the male and female were honored in balance. The divine masculine and feminine, the mother, father, God, and also a daughter and a son. And so for a lot of that period of time, the Jews were wonderful and living peacefully in Canaan and all was well. But the priests of Yahweh did not want any other sex but themselves to be in charge. So they went after destroying any sex that honored the divine mother, the divine daughter, or the divine son. And of course, we got the divine son back with Christianity, but we never got the mother or the daughter back. I mean, most people don't even know there is a daughter. Maybe they think of Mary, the mother, as the mother, but the Catholic Church is very clear that Mary was just a woman and the physical womb and the vessel through which the Son of God came. And so they're not saying the divine mother, they're just saying mother, a mother. So even though, Mary has had something like 256 apparitions all around the world where she's healed people and delivered messages. So really functioning on a higher celestial level. So I think that's one thing that happened. I think that at another level, I think that I don't know if your audience is familiar with this or if you are. I suspect you are, and we don't have to go down this path if it's too far out for your show. But there's increasing knowledge and evidence with the translation of the Sumerian cuneiform text of the existence of very tall, human, long-lived beings that were called the Anunnaki or the Anakim. They were called by different names. And they were basically world civilizers. And what these Sumerian tablets talk about is that about 438,000 years ago, their astronauts basically came to our planet, and mankind, it does appear, was in a pretty primitive state at that point. We were probably in our Cro-Magnon or Neanderthal state. And basically they were mining for gold because they had a problem with the ozone layer in their own atmosphere. And they discovered through their own technology that if they created a gold foil sheeting, they could block the cosmic rays, which then meant that their crops wouldn't suffer. And this is, of course, what we've discovered with astronauts. If we put gold foil sheeting on the windows, it blocks the cosmic rays so that the astronauts don't get hurt inside the craft, and they can still see through the sheeting. So the problem was their planet is a very big planet, and they really didn't have enough gold on their own planet, so they came here, and they were involved in mining operations in Africa, South Africa, near the Zambezi River. And of course, we now know that there are tens of thousands of gold mines that they have found remnants of, many of which have been mined out in that area. And they found a 5-ton hematite slab over a dig site and gone down and carbon dated Homo sapien bones at 150 to 200,000 years. So what appeared to have happened in that arc of history is that they did their own mining for a long time, but then their own people just got exhausted and said, hell no, we're not going to take it anymore. And so then it was like either they give up and their planet eventually dies and their people die, or they became desperate and said, well, we'll break the non-interference rule and we could take these Cro-Magnon people and kind of jumpstart them and mix their DNA with our DNA and see if we can come up with a intelligent enough human worker. And so after many experiments, that's basically what they did. And so that's why in the Bible, the original is, as Genesis starts off, beyond, in the beginning was the Word and, the heavens and the earth. When we get around to God created man and woman, the word for that was Elohim, which is the plural meaning the gods.
Right, yeah.
And so, right. So, the gods created, Homo sapien, the first Homo sapien, before Homo sapien sapien. And, they sort of, taught us a lot of things about farming and mining and making civilizations and, helping them out with their basic necessities. And then eventually they, remated themselves to us, and we wound up with Homo sapien sapien. And from that point on, it seems that we have a lot more sophistication with the knowledge of city-states, metallurgy, architecture, mathematics. You know, really all the arts of civilization slowly got passed down. And we had very, Atlantis, grew up. And, of course, once Atlantis went down, we had worldwide devastation, and most of what was here was covered up from the deluge. And some of these things are starting to be uncovered now, either discovered underwater, like the huge, massive pyramid cities off the coast of Okinawa in Japan, or off the coast of Cuba, where they've discovered beautiful cities that look like Greek cities that were part of Atlantis. So the Anunnaki gods, in their own very long lives, some of the leaders, the main leaders that had been in charge of everything for so long, began to move off of our planet around that 4000 BC period of time, and their sons and daughters were left in charge. And some of their sons and daughters were not under the same edict of don't make war. They came to look at, as they had sons and daughters that wanted power. I'll take this state, you take that state, I'll take this city, you take that city. Well, then, of course, if they had squabbles among themselves, they started putting the humans to work, fighting the battles for them, like, chess masters. So we sort of became, we humans became pawns. And this is why, one of the reasons why even today, so much of the conflict in the world is we're fighting about whose God is the real God, Is it Allah? The Jews have to kill the Arabs have to kill the Jews. Let's go kill the Christians. The Christians have to go kill the other. It's all this crazy stuff that we've inherited that we don't even know where we got it from. And of course, this isn't, in the book, Sophia, I do speak about the Anunnaki a couple of times. I certainly don't give an incredibly long history of the Anunnaki, because even though I know it and I've studied this extensively and I speak on it. But I think that what we appear to have, is that they made the conflicts between the gods escalated from about 4000 BC. And they sort of culminated at an overt level around 2150 BC, where the Sinai Peninsula got bombed. And this is the whole Sodom and Gomorrah story, where now, the whole area is a desert, and it used to be the Fertile Crescent. It used to be an incredibly beautiful savannas, and now we have, the deserts of Iraq and Iran. And and I think what happened is the elders realized that their kids had gone berserk, pulled the reins and said, wait a minute, for all the good we've done down here on this planet, look what just happened. We've created amazing devastation. We've hurt the planet. We've hurt the environment. We've killed the animals. We've killed the crops. And we have taught humans the art of war. So maybe we should back off. And maybe we should let humans learn to govern themselves. And this is a sort of what started happening. But there were a few disgruntled kids. And by kids, I don't mean that they're not long-lived as well. These kids could still be 200,000 years old or 300,000 years old, because in their world, 1 year was 3,600 of our years. So if they live to be 100 of their years, that's 360,000 of our years. So of course that would make them, they don't even look like they've aged to us. Centuries pass for us, and for them it's a year. And they had something that they took called from the tree of life, and it was actually a real physical tree. It was like a soma that they made into an elixir, and it basically doubled their lifespan. So on their planet, they could live almost 1 million years. So when they came down here, of course, it eventually shortened their lifespan, because our lifespans are tied to the rotation of our planet around our sun. So I think that what happened, this is Yahweh. I mean, Yahweh, if you believe the story in the Bible, on one hand, gives the Hebrew people the 10 Commandments. Don't lie, cheat, steal, kill. That was great, some moral guidelines. And then at the next breath says, oh, go to Cana, steal the land, kill the people, rape the women, and if you don't do what I say, I will hunt you down to the last man, woman, child, pig, and goat and punish you.
Yeah, they leave that out in the movies for some reason.
Right. So it's like either we have a schizophrenic God, okay, that certainly isn't God with a big G. It's one of these extraterrestrials who was just, having a bad day and taking it out on those poor Hebrews. Or we have one of the gods who was trying to, who was probably pissed off with the God that was running Egypt, got his people out and said, no, this group's mine. I'm moving them over so I can wield them into an army, march them around the desert for 40 years, and then, set them into a place where I can, basically order them about and they know I'm the authority. Again, God with a small g, but maybe he meant okay. However, according to the priest of Yahweh, who, as you discover if you read the book on Sophia, I actually relate in a very condensed form what biblical scholars have now discovered, which is that the Old Testament appears to be made up primarily of 4 different groups of writing. What they call the J, which stands for the Jehovah writings, the D, which stands for the Deuteronomy writings, I think it's the P, I want to call it also the E. It's not E, but it's the Elohim writings, basically. So they have figured out that something like only 40 to 60% of the first 5 books of the Bible, which compose the Torah, which is sacred to the Jews, and of course the Arabs as well, that was written probably about 300 years, probably around the time of King Solomon, 950 BC, and if the Exodus from Moses was around 1250, that was written about 300 years after the fact. And the other 40 to 60% of those 5 books were written someplace between 500 and 200 BC, meaning they were written 700 to 1,000 years after the event. For example, we found out that the Jews didn't have the story of the flood until after their time of captivity in Babylon. After that, they came back and added the story of the flood and changed the name to become Noah, the Noah that we know. They also didn't have the story of the Garden of Eden, and they came back and changed that. The original story appears in the Atrahasis and the Enumad Elish, which are Babylonian stories. And they came back, and those stories said, the gods, plural, created man and woman together. Well, the patriarchal priest of Yahweh came back and said, God, with a big G, created man, and then, as an afterthought, said, I guess I'll give him some company and pull from his rib woman, so she's sort of subservient to him, and she's meant to be his servant. And this justified their sort of superior claim that man's a dominant species, and women are just sort of the appendage. So, you can sort of see how this distortion, and it has to do with political agendas. And, I come out of a very traditional Christian family. My older sister is married to a preacher. And they're good people. They really are. But they are very, very narrow and very limited. And many times I've had the scripture quoted to me about how the pecking order is God, then man, then woman, then children. And that's the chain of command. And, women have to obey children have to obey the woman, and then they have to obey the father, who trumps the woman. And then he has to get all of his directions from God, and his directions are the directions that run the family. And, it's just such a strange way of thinking to me that we would presume that no one has a brain. except a man.
Except man, yes. And I can vouch that that's not true as a man. I don't have a brain.
No, you seem like you got a great brain. And there are great men nowadays. I mean, I'm so lucky. I live in America. There are wonderful men like yourself who are doing incredible work about balance, work to bring back that harmony. I feel very, very blessed that I look over across the Atlantic and I see, the Muslim brothers and sisters where the men are still playing the superior role and women, men, the women are actually being punished by the way they dress, what they're allowed to do, what they're allowed to say, and if they break the rules, they're pretty much killed.
Agreed.
And it's crazy making. I mean, would those men ever agree to those rules for themselves? Would they wear dark burqas and cover up their faces in a hot climate? I mean, I heard it got to be 165 degrees in Iran this past.
Tricia, so going to the title of your book, and for the listener, her book has everything. It's a very rich history and meta-history and alternative history, and she puts it all together very well. What exactly do you mean by the return of Sophia? Obviously, the listeners know much about the Gnostic Sophia, the hidden wisdom of God that is not in this world, or the wisdom of the unified God that this world is lacking. What do you mean by the return of Sophia?
Well, Sophia, as you know, was considered the goddess of wisdom in both the Greek and the Hebrew teachings. And the Hebrew teachings, as I said, have a lot of wisdom and beauty to them. The further back you go, the more you really discover that. And particularly some of the great mystics around 1000 AD who were bringing, back the teachings of the balance through the tree of life, and the Kabbalah. But, the Gnostics, who were the earliest Christians, the ones that were probably the original Essenes that became the converts, to the teachings of Jesus, and the teachings of Jesus transcended even the Essene teachings. He was a master of all these different spiritual paths, and he kind of reduced it down to very simple things like love your neighbor as yourself, and forgiveness is the key, and the kingdom of heaven is within, and so forth. And his teachings, as in the book, I share about 4 or 5 chapters of them, but I also talk about Mary Magdalene. And Mary Magdalene, Jesus openly says, he calls, God the Abba, Amma, the Father, Mother God. He says that, he is the Son, and that periodically the Son and the daughter come to earth, even as I and Mary Magdalene have come together. So he tells us right there that she's the daughter. Well, for the Gnostics, they believe that there was, God the Mother, the Sophia the Elder, that doesn't come into this world, who is literally the fabric of this world, the creator of this world, and there is God the Daughter. And God the Daughter, like God the Son, Jesus, or Issa, periodically comes to earth. And they believe that Mary Magdalene was in fact the incarnation of Sophia the daughter, and that she has continually reincarnated on this planet since the time that Jesus was here, in expectation, in hope of the time when we will awaken and begin to remember who we are again, and remember to come back into balance. And Jesus even says, I will not return until she is re-enthroned in the heart of the world. Until the divine feminine is re-recognized and comes back into balance with the divine masculine, I cannot return. Now, does he literally mean he physically returning? Well, maybe he does. I mean, for heaven's sakes, these are, we're all immortal beings, but the difference is that he is a self-aware, completely self-aware, God-aware, immortal being who's done his work and is very likely a direct emanation of the Godhead. And this is one of the things that I discovered in writing these books and researching and spending all that time in the cave. I sort of had always thought Jesus was, wonderful and cool and like many other wonderful masters. But I started being visited by these masters in my dream state at home, and they would come night after night and teach me and download to me and have me up at all times, the night. And one of them, when I began to pray for historical information about the Great White Brotherhood, one night this master came that looked so much like Jesus, but he was like a hair's breadth different. And all he said to me was, Sanat Kumara. And the next night, he took me into this initiation hall with all these high-level masters in white, and they initiated me. And they made the sign of the serpent on my forehead. And, I have enough of my fundamentalist Christian, training to be like, the sign of the serpent! Yeah. Oh my God! Oh my God, what's happening? So I happened to have an East Indian housemate at the time, and a very wise man, who had also studied with the Viragi. He had been an initiate of the Viragi in India. And I said to him, do you know anything about Sanat Kumara? And he says, he is one of the 4 great Kumaras. I was like, the 4 great Kumaras? Who are those? They are the 4 sons of God, direct emanations of the Godhead that are spoken of in the Vedas. I was like, really? Well, who are they? Well, there is Sanat Kumara, who is, of course, the head of the Great White Brotherhood. I was like, what? And this is, of course, who come to see me. And I said, well, who else? And he says, well, there is Sananda Kumara, who, of course, incarnated as Jesus. I was like, holy smokes. I said, well, who else? And he said, well, there is Sananka Kumara. I said, well, what's his story? He comes to set up the great mystery schools across the world. Well, this would be Thoth. And, of course, I speak about Thoth. I've worked with Thoth. I have had a mystery school for over 10 years here in Atlanta. I actually have a 12-part online course. If you go to my website, you can look under Mysteries online course. You can order it. Incredible. Each 130 to 180 page, beautiful books, gorgeous illustrations, lots of exercises and processes, and very, very reasonable, in price. And I only had set up that school because Thoth appeared to me 3 separate times and asked me to set up the school. And so I finally did. I began some years ago. So, and I said, well, who's the last one? And he says, Sanantana Kumara. He comes only very rarely, only in times of greatest darkness, when it looks as if the dark will win in the world. And I was like, oh my God, well, that would be Horus. And of course, I've worked with Horus for 30 years. It would also probably be Rama and Krishna, because all of them, they're all poets and musicians. They're known for their poetry, their playing the harp, playing the flute, and yet they have to pony up and, lead an army into battle. Rama, if you remember in the Ramayana in the East, he fought Ravana, the evil, demonic Rakshasa who was killing everything. Krishna, he led the battle in the famous Indian epic, the Mahabharata. And that's the story where the 5 princes go in, Prince Arjuna, who's asking him as all the troops are aligned against each other, and Arjuna's like, hey, I don't want to go over there. I know these people are supposed to be bad, but there's my uncle, there's my cousin, I don't really want to kill them. And that's when, Krishna gives him the speech about, do you not understand that we're all immortal, and that there's a time when the dark becomes so strong in the world that a force of light must arise, and that, in order to bring balance back, and that's what we're doing here, no one ever really dies. And then, of course, Horus. And Horus, of course, was Isis and Osiris's son in ancient Egypt. And he represented truth and light and the moral path, the high path. And his father, Osiris, who was known as the great humanitarian, that after the flood, all the humans were starving. And he went around and brought them food and brought them seeds and brought them tools and taught them to replenish and to grow food for themselves. He was, of course, a musician as well, and that's why he was known as the green god. That's who Osiris was. He was so beloved. He was the Christ of his day. In fact, the followers of Osiris were called Christians, and it was Christ, K-R-S-T. Christ was the core word, which meant this Christed, like a nectar energy that he embodied. And he was murdered by his evil half-brother, Set, which is where we get Satan from. Set's original name was Setu. And so Set kind of represented, the negative ego. He lied, he cheated, he murdered, he killed, he stole his lands, he tried to rape Isis, and get her to marry him. And so Horus was the child that was born in secret of Isis and Osiris, who grew up in the path of truth and who then challenged his uncle, took Egypt back from 350 years of darkness and set all things right with his mother Isis. And so, here's saying these are the great Kumaras. And so, this is a lot, isn't it?
Yes, there is a lot. And again, visit Tricia's website, read her book, because it is a spanning history, but it does make sense. And but to end, and again, we could talk about this all day.
Can we give out my website? Would that be okay?
Yeah, no, please do.
It's really so simple. It's just my name. It's www.TrishaMcCannon.com or TrishaMcCannonSpeaks.com. They'll both get you to the same place. And it's spelled Tricia, that spelling, and McCannon's just like it sounds, MC, and then Cannon, Cannon. And you're very welcome to contact me, shoot me an email. My phone number's on the website. And as you'll see, I've got about 30 DVDs and about 10 or 20 CDs and, these wonderful books, and then the whole mystery school classes. So, yeah, so you were saying to finish, the Return of the Divine Sophia is about the return of this balance of the divine feminine that brings all of us back into a place of wisdom. And when this happens, it's a movement. It's a movement that we are all a part of, which is to bring balance to our planet and healing to our planet. I truly do believe that these beings as souls can return. But it's not just about their returning. It's about it awakening within us. The divine masculine, the beautiful divine masculine, as opposed to the destructive masculine. The beautiful divine feminine can awaken within men as well as women because we all possess it, instead of the destructive, catty, jealous, backstabbing feminine. And as I talk about in the book, there is a negative feminine, a positive feminine, a negative masculine, a positive masculine. And the path of true mastery is the middle path between the positive and masculine and the positive feminine. And it's that middle path that Jesus talked about as the way. Both talked about it as the ancient way. Buddha talked about it as the middle way. But that's the path that we have to journey in order to save our planet, heal our earth, heal our spirits, save and change and transform our societies, and to come back into balance with ourselves.
I couldn't agree more, and very well said. It's the old Gospel of Thomas, make the two into the one so you can become whole. I think that's all the time we have today, Tricia. I'd like to thank you very much for giving us a very engaging discussion and to discuss your book, Return of the Divine Sophia.
Thank you so very much. I'm very grateful to you, Miguel, for having such a wonderful program and really a platform for these kinds of messages to go out, and to all of our listeners out there who are on a path of transformation. I send my blessings and my love.
Likewise.